IECC for existing buildings. Illinois is in the continues to push in on the front as far as energy codes go. They're in the process of moving to the 2018 IECC, and it is presently anticipated to go into effect July 1st, 2019. It has been a moving target, but currently it's slated to go on in effect on July 1st, 2019. Today's webinar is being recorded, and you will be able to access it on our C-DAC website, also along with the PDF of all the slides that we're going to have. The controls on your screen, if you hover at the top or bottom, you can see you'll be able to pull up a question box. So feel free to ask questions during the presentation. We'll try to get to them at the end. If not, we will respond afterwards. There will also be a certificate of completion, and a survey will be sent out after the webinar to all participants. And thank you very much for joining today's webinar. So, C-DAC, who are we? We've been in effect. We've been around since about 2004. Due to some legislation a few years ago, we were out of business for a while, but we are back in the saddle. We are a private partnership, and our private partner is a public-private partnership. Our private entity that we work with is 360 Energy Group. They are located up in Chicago, and just a delightful group of people to work with. So our goal throughout history, since 2004, has been to reduce the energy footprint of Illinois. We have primarily focused on buildings, but we have expanded recently into some other areas, such as wastewater treatment plants also. Today's training program is brought to you by the Illinois EPA, Office of Energy. C-DAC collaborates with the IEPA to provide code training and technical assistance for Illinois Energy Conservation Code. And they've been great to work with. So, energy code assistance. C-DAC provides technical support for code officials, architects, engineers, contractors, building owners, and there's various ways to contact us by either phone or email. You can see the 1-800 number, the energy code at cdac.org. We get a lot of questions and on that via email, and we get them from, as I mentioned, basically code officials, architects, engineers, contractors, and building owners. It's always interesting to see the questions that come in. We have numerous online resources on our website. Access to the IECC, links to resources for builders and code officials, links to ResCheck, CompCheck, DOE links, and more. There's an archive of past workshops and webinars available. We advertise our upcoming webinars and workshops. Our next workshop will be the Commercial Energy Code Basics and 2018 IECC on June 11th at John A. Logan College in Carterville, Illinois. For those of you that favor online courses, there are currently links to 4 online IECC training modules based on the 2015 IECC, Illinois Energy Conservation Code. They are residential provisions, commercial envelope, commercial lighting, and commercial HVAC. Our new modules that we're working on will cover the 2018 IECC. So one of the pages on our website, we update regularly. It's to let you know what codes are in effect and the anticipated adoption dates of these codes also. As I said earlier, July 1st, 2019 is our anticipated adoption of the 2018 IECC. On our website, you can, on cdac.org, you can see up at the top right-hand corner, there's an energy code training link, and that will get you to this page, which is, you can see energy code training on the left side there, the Illinois Energy Conservation Code, workshops, webinars, online training, and so on and so forth. And a lot of good information here too, for everyone, code officials, designers, contractors. So there's quite a few different I codes. They cover everything from mechanical, plumbing, fuel gas code, existing buildings, the International Energy Conservation Code, IBC. So I think there's about 15 or 17 different codes, if I'm not mistaken. And the nice thing is they cross-reference each other. So they don't duplicate each other, they cross-reference each other. And you can see on this page at the top, there's links to the two codes that we're going to be talking about today, basically the IECC 2018 and the IEBC Existing Building Code 2018. The the IECC allows for free access to their codes, which is a great benefit. You cannot download them and print them, but you can access all these codes online. So this is a very handy feature for the international codes. So today we're going to be talking about existing buildings. This is a layout of the 2018 IECC, the chapters in the IECC 1 through 6, and today's presentation is going to be on existing buildings, and I'm going to turn over the next few slides to Mr. Ryan Siegel.
Well, thank you, Robert. As Robert said, today we're predominantly going to cover Chapter 5 of the IECC. Now there are several references back to predominantly Chapter 4 in Chapter 5, and a lot of that is rather than reiterating all the what the levels are for different aspects of a building, it just refers back to the new construction section for where appropriate. So under Chapter 5, there's 6 different subparts. Predominantly what we're going to focus on is existing buildings, as well as maintenance, and some new and replacement additions and alterations. So as far as the scope of Chapter 5, here we're looking at alteration, additions, and change of occupancy of existing buildings and structures. And so one question that will come up frequently is, well, is there a certain threshold where an alteration, where a repair becomes an alteration? And there really is not any particular thresholds of that, with the exception of lighting. Lighting, they call out a specific percentage that then has to switch from this is just a repair to an actual alteration for code compliance. And we'll touch a little bit more on this a little later, particularly as we get towards roofing, and making sure that we're understanding definitions and being cognizant of the exceptions to see if the work has to be brought up to full code compliance, or if you're able to just do a small modification without having to cover a lot of additional aspects. So as far as existing buildings, the code is fairly nice in that it grandfathers most things in, and so it doesn't require alteration and changing of existing buildings, as long as they are not being altered, changed, or added onto. And so you can continue to use the existing buildings with the as they are, without having to bring them up to the current IECC standards. So this is particularly useful where it notes the code permitting additions and alterations without requiring the existing unmodified parts to be brought up to the code. So one good example of this is if you're doing roof replacement, that doesn't require you to touch and modify the HVAC equipment that may be on that roof in order to bring the roof up to code compliance. So as far as new and replacement materials, obviously the code encourages current building practices and materials to be used. They do also note that where you do have restoration going on, you're likely to run into materials that may be hazardous, such as asbestos and lead paint, and these cannot be used because they can create hazards to life, health, and property. So that's very important. So as far as historic buildings, Illinois calls out a specific set of buildings in the Illinois Administrative Code. And these are the three listed here as far as either being listed on the National or Illinois Register of Historic Places, or designated by the authorized personnel, typically the code official or the Historical Preservation Society, as historically significant. These historic buildings are not required to comply with the Illinois Energy Conservation Code at all. So if you are listed on the registers, then your renovations and alterations would not be required to comply with the IECC. Now, if you are not in one of these three locations, you may be eligible under the International Energy Conservation Code for qualification of historic. Here you note in yellow that whereas Illinois, if it's listed, then you are not required to comply with any of the Illinois Energy Code. Here, if you are certified as eligible for listing on the National Register of Historic Places, then you may have additional provisions under the International Energy Conservation Code as far as compliance goes. So you can see they're very similar between the Illinois Energy Conservation Code and the International Energy Conservation Code, those two are similar but a little bit different. Now, as far as if you are not exempt by the Illinois Energy Conservation Code and you are instead historic under the International Energy Conservation Code, here they do provide some allowance here as far as if you would like to be exempted from a provision, you have to demonstrate that compliance with that provision would threaten, degrade, or destroy the historic form, fabric, or function of the building. One example of this could be, if you are doing some work in an attic, adding insulation to that attic is likely to not degrade or destroy the historic form, fabric, or function of the building. And so compliance may likely be required in that for something like attic insulation. But if you're in a space and you are doing some lighting restorations, it is it would not be uncommon for those to be excluded because the historic nature of that lighting is part of the historic character of that building. So as far as additions to historic buildings, here in this photo you can see the historic building on the left and the addition that they had placed onto the historic building towards the right of the picture. The addition would have to be in full compliance with the code, but the existing would not necessarily be required to be upgraded to the full current and present standards. So have Robert talk a little bit more here regarding additions to buildings.
Thank you, Ryan. So let's talk about the definition right out of the code first for addition. It's an extension or increase in the conditioned space, floor area, number of stories, or height of a building or structure. So I think the key words are conditioned space, increase in conditioned space. So as Ryan mentioned earlier, additions to an existing building system or portion thereof shall conform to the code as it relates to new construction. So basically it's anything you would do for a new building without requiring the unaltered portion of the existing building or building system to comply. So that just reinforces what Ryan was just talking about. So obviously additions should not create an unsafe condition or overload existing building systems. Additions, they also need to comply with section C402 through C405, which C402 is the building envelope requirement, C403 building mechanical system, C404 the surface water heating, and C405 electrical power and lighting systems. And C502.2 it has to comply with 2, which is a prescriptive compliance. Or you could go the ASHRAE 90.1 route, 2. So section C502, additions, any non-conditioned space that is altered become conditioned space shall be required to be brought into full compliance with the code. Here you can see it looks like the interior of a warehouse. It's being modified or finished out. So examples: converting part of an unconditioned warehouse to office space, which is not unusual, or shell building tenant build-outs, that's very common, or converting a garage to a family room. Those would all be considered additions because you're increasing the conditioned space. So when we're talking about vertical fenestration and additions, C502.2.1, these are basically, I'm reviewing basically what you have to do if you're designing a new building. For vertical fenestration areas, less than 30% of gross above grade wall area, you have to comply to the 3 bullet points below that. Section C402.1.5, which is a component performance alternative. The next one, 402.4.3, which is prescriptive, the maximum U factor and solar heat gain coefficient specified in table C402.4, or the total building performance, section C407. So those are there's 3 different compliance paths. If you have greater than 30% of gross above the wall area, you've got to comply with C402.4.1.1, increased vertical fenestration with daylight response controls, meaning you've got so much daylight probably coming in that code's going to require you to put daylight response controls so that your lighting can respond to all the daylight coming in through your windows. And likewise, areas greater than allowed in that section will have to comply with C402.1.5 or C047, which is the performance compliance path. Skylight areas, the maximum amount of area. C402.4.1 prescribes for both fenestration and skylights how much surface area of the you can have in fenestration and skylights, and maximum area of skylights shall be no greater than 3% of the gross roof area. And you have to comply with the component performance alternative or the total building performance paths. If you are going beyond the 3%, you have to comply with C402.4.1.2, which requires you to install daylight response controls. Basically the same thing as if you're going with fenestration of over 30%. So, mechanical systems and additions. They must comply with sections 403, building mechanical systems. And includes all the subsections in C403 too, which basically refer you back to the International Mechanical Code, the IMC, or the IRC, if it's residential, International Residential Code, as applicable. Now, for residential additions with extended ductwork from an existing system, extensions do not need to be tested in accordance with section 403.3.3 per Illinois amendments. So the Illinois amendments on residences have preempt the IECC, but they must be sealed per section R403.3.2. Ductwork needs to be securely fastened and sealed with welds, gaskets, mastic plus embedded fabric systems, liquid sealants, or tapes, but not your duct tape that you pick up at Home Depot or someplace, which we've seen a lot of. The duct tape tends to dry out and lose its sealing capabilities. There are special tapes, and they are very sticky, and so you have to be cognizant of what type of tape you're using if you're using a tape. Most of the stuff that we see in the field are, as you see in the picture there, paint-on type sealants that remain flexible. So, in your new addition, if you have any type of water heating system, it's addressed by C502.2.4. It must comply with C404 surface water heating to meet the energy code, and this includes all subsections of that area, that C404, including the performance, efficiency, heat traps, insulation of piping, maximum piping length, and so on. The heat traps, I was looking those up, and just this is a little tangent here. You can see the picture on the right side there. The right water heater has got a heat trap up at the top. It's that little trap that looks like what you see in a waste system. And then the left one does not have one. And what happens is that warm water, it's less dense. So it has this tendency to want to travel up the pipe and displace some of the cool water that then falls down into the water heater. So it creates this sort of convective loop, and that convective loop is it's lessened, or it's really terminated if you have that trap at the top there. What are the magnitude of these losses? I don't know, and I haven't seen any numbers on it, but it is required by code. I wonder how much difference it makes if you're using PEX tubing. I don't know, but anyway, it's the heat trap is in the code. So pools and in-ground permanently installed spas. If you're a hotel, say, and putting in a new pool on the outside, all the water heating systems and equipment in addition must comply with section C404.9. Energy consumption of pools and permanent spas. Everything in that section is mandatory. It addresses heaters, time switches, and covers. The heaters have to have a on-off switch within 3 feet of the heater. And gas-fired heaters shall not be equipped with continuous burning ignition pilot. Timers, time switches, or automated controls to turn off and on heaters and pump motors to a preset schedule should be installed, with the exception of public health standards requiring 24/7 operation, or pumps that operate with waste heat recovery pool heating systems. Covers, outdoor heated pools and permanently spas shall be provided a vapor retardant cover or other approved vapor retardant means, with the exception if you have greater than 75% of your heat from on-site recovery systems, then you wouldn't be required to have a cover. C502.2.6, lighting power and systems. Interior lighting, either the addition alone or as a whole in the existing building, should comply with the C405.3.2 interior lighting power allowance. And those tables, C405.3.2, that is the lighting power, that's the building area method. And the other table, 405.3.2, table 2, is your space by space method. So basically your lighting power densities. Exterior lighting for either the addition or the whole building should comply with C405.4.2 and the exterior lighting power allowance. And once again, it just references the two tables that have your lighting power densities, basically. Lighting power and systems. The Illinois amendments specify lighting efficacy for no less than 90% of lamps to be 60 lumens per watt or greater. And fixtures are 55 lumens per watt or greater. This applies to the residential addition alone. So this is on a residence basis, and so the allowable low efficacy fixtures lamps may differ depending on the other fixtures in the residence. So basically, it's reinforcing what Ryan said earlier. Additions must comply with codes, everything from the insulation levels, fenestration, U values, solar heat gain coefficients, electrical, NEC requirements, but the existing structure does not need to be upgraded. Looking at residential additions, we've got, just quickly, table R402.1.2, insulation and fenestration criteria. So the addition must be that or 402.1.4, which is the U factor alternative. So two different compliance paths for the room addition on your residence. And additions comply if any of the following is demonstrated. The addition alone complies with the provisions of this code. The existing building and addition together comply with as a single building, or the existing building additional and addition together use no more energy than the existing building. That would be using your performance path where you're doing modeling. The other two would be more prescriptive. So that takes care of additions pretty much, and I am going to turn things back over to Mr. Siegel.
Well, thank you. Next up, we have from additions, now we get into alterations. This is probably where the majority of the work and compliance ends up lying here, because buildings will likely go through many alterations over their life, whereas they may or may not have additions. So as far as alterations, noting here that alterations that I kind of talked about earlier, anytime you're doing additions or alterations, the code requires that the manipulated parts of the building need to be brought in compliance with the code. Earlier, the example was, if I'm doing a roof, it doesn't necessarily, the code doesn't require me to pull the HVAC equipment in order to work on that roof. And so here noting that the unaltered structures or systems can remain with their existing level of conformance of the code. So you cannot do anything to impair the performance of the existing equipment to make the energy performance worse of the equipment. So, as far as alterations, the code does call out several exceptions as far as where code required. The code does not require things to be brought in full compliance. Several of these are just modifications to existing portions. Storm windows, obviously your window is being kept in place, so this is just providing some additional protection and likely some additional performance benefits to the existing windows by adding some storm windows. Surface applied window films. Number 3 here, noting existing ceiling, wall, or floor cavities exposed during construction, provided that these cavities are filled with insulation. This is a couple of this one phrase here is actually a pretty heavy phrase. As far as an example of this would be if you open, you remove the drywall on an exterior wall, you've now exposed the wall cavity. The code does not require you to bring that wall into full compliance. An example would be cavity insulation of R20 in our regions here. That won't fit in a typical 2x4 wall. It doesn't require, the code does not require you to fur the wall out in order to put the full R20 into the wall. It only requires that you fill that cavity with insulation. Now, the code further goes on to talk about that you cannot cause a hazard to occur by doing compliance. And so with that, if we have masonry walls, City of Chicago, along with several others, and we agree from a building science perspective, that allowing a 1-inch air gap on the exterior of the cavity is considered filling that cavity. By providing that 1-inch air gap, it allows that masonry to dry. And so that goes back to C503 or R503.1, preventing an unsafe or hazardous condition, in this case degradation of the building, to occur. So that number 3 can be a fairly heavy exception. Construction existing, obviously if I'm doing construction and I'm not exposing the cavity, I don't have to deal with anything in the cavity. Number 5, a roof recover. This goes back to the definition of a roof recover, which is that you are placing a new membrane over the top of an existing membrane. So the existing membrane would still remain after you do your roof recover. It does not require code compliance with the roof if you are just purely placing a new, and I believe in the Illinois amendments, they're talking a weather-resistive membrane over top of the existing weather-resistive membrane. And then number 6 is, again, air barriers, looking at air barriers. And the importance of that is making sure that we are not trapping moisture where we don't want it to be. So, Robert touched a little bit earlier as far as changes in space conditioning, and he had noted about low energy spaces to being brought into condition. You do have to bring those into compliance with the code. Now the code does provide a couple of exceptions where, as long as you're within 10%, either using the total UA or energy performance or energy costs, if you're within 10%, the code acknowledges that is sufficient without requiring full code compliance. So here we have depicted, here we had a previous Quonset hut being converted to a multi-use facility. So the code with this 10% kind of allows you to be relatively good without necessarily requiring perfection on here. As far as the building envelope, here looking at different, if you're doing modifications to the building envelope, it's calling out that you do have to comply with it. However, if you have fenestration levels exceeding the 30% for windows or exceeding the 3% for skylights, the code does allow you to maintain the same surface area. However, the U factors and solar heat gain coefficients of the new fenestration must match the code required levels. So it allows you to maintain an existing opening condition that would not have necessarily been in compliance otherwise. Roof replacement, this is probably where most questions on envelope come up. As far as roof replacement, noting that where the thermal envelope contains the insulation entirely above deck, when you remove that membrane, such as that depicted in the picture, you have to bring it up to compliance. Now, there are a couple of different ways. Two of them are component-based and performance or prescriptive-based, and two are performance-based. R value and U factor is found in the tables earlier in C402, where that's purely just a insulation value that you have to meet. 40215 is a components performance method. With this could be if you have a multi-component roof. So you may have a roof where you have insulation, and then you may use insulated panels or insulated roofing panels over top of it. So you may have multiple types of insulation, and so you can use components performance method or the total building performance method for compliance. As far as vertical fenestration, here again noting that as long as your fenestration is not changed, you can also use a total building performance method. And for residential, you can use area weighted U factor, solar heat gain coefficients, or both for residential. So the dark blue text here is the residential. The green and white is for commercial. So, as far as skylight area, here again, this is again similar, where your skylight, if you're just replacing the existing skylight and you are not enlarging it, then compliance can be demonstrated using total building performance method or the values, yes, into C40751 sub 1. As far as the reference design, normally when you use building performance methods, that table C40751 specifies here is the reference design that you must use as far as your basis of what you're comparing the new building against. And some of those provisions are that maximum of 30 or 3% for vertical fenestration or skylighting. This allows you to use the existing envelope as your reference design rather than the baseline of only 30% or 3% in the case of skylights. So as far as heating and cooling systems, these are, again, whatever you are altering, then you have to bring those up to the current standards. That includes things such as economizers. And so for residential, we had noted earlier that there's an exception for duct leakage testing. Here in the IECC, it has, as long as the duct is less than 40 feet, then you don't have to do testing. Illinois has amended that to any length. However, it must be sealed. Service water heating, again, if you're doing alterations, the same thing as an addition applies. If you're altering your hot water system, you need to bring it up to the current standards. As far as lighting, this is one area where the code definitely does call out differences between alterations and repairs. So alterations here are classified in commercial is alterations that replace 10% or more of the luminaires. And in residential, it's considered an alteration if you are replacing at least 50% of the luminaires in a space. And in this case, a space being a single room. So if you are below those thresholds of 10 or 50%, that's considered a repair, and so you don't have to bring it up to the full current standard as long as the lighting power is not being increased. So this, if you go over 10 or 50%, depending on the location, that's when you get into lighting power densities, lighting controls, etc. So, and on residential, something different, sorry. So as far as a repair, so here's the code's definition of what a repair is, and they call out a few that are specifically defined as repairs. You know, replacing the glass in an existing sash and frame, that's considered a repair. Roof repair is also a repair. Existing doors, here noting if you replace the door, while the door needs to comply, it doesn't require the installation of vestibules, assuming that an existing vestibule was not removed as part of it. And for repairs where only the bulb, ballast, or both within the existing luminaires are replaced. So this would be something to be aware of, particularly if you're doing LED replacements, is if you are upgrading a fixture from fluorescent to LED, as long as the original fixture is remaining, that is considered a repair. If you replace the fixture, then you may get into a situation that you're into an alteration. So that's something to be aware of. So as far as changes of use or occupancy, this is where the code calls out changes of occupancy is either change in occupancy classification, so that could be going from a group M to a group R or other associated groups. This could also be a change from one group to another group within an occupancy classification. So you might be in a group R, a group R1 single family home. Well, you might change to a different classification within the group that might be considered multifamily. So if you convert from single family to multifamily, that's a change in occupancy, and it would require bringing the entire building into current code compliance. So here, looking at in general, what they're looking at as far as helping to determine some of this is anytime you're changing occupancy that would increase the demand for fossil fuels or electricity. So if I'm going to convert a warehouse into a manufacturing facility, that would definitely increase the demand for fossil fuels or electricity, and so would trigger code update and compliance for that. Also, if you're changing from one type to another in your lighting tables, this is one benefit of using the building area method as opposed to space by space method, as those are much larger and broader groups. And so again, here you see that 110% coming into play as far as if you're using component performance or total building performance methods to show current code compliance. So the green text here is new to the 2018 IECC. The white was previously found in the 2015. So, as far as things coming up, we do have Robert noted an upcoming workshop Tuesday, June 11th, starting at 10 a.m. For Energy Code Basics for the commercial side, and that's going to be down at John A. Logan College down in Carterville, Illinois. That's Southern Illinois. There will be a similar workshop scheduled for later in June that is planned to be somewhere up in northern Illinois, probably somewhere perhaps around the Rockford area. So be looking forward to that. We do have several questions coming in here, and if you do come up with questions or need some additional assistance, we definitely encourage you to use our email address, energycode@cdac.org. So we'll try to put together some responses. If we don't answer your questions today here online, we'll work to get back with you offline as well. As far as roofs here, we're getting a fair number. As I noted, roofs seem to be a common question area. I think probably part of that may have something to do with every building has to have a roof every so often, and particularly flat roofs or low sloping roofs a little more frequently. So as far as if a commercial roof is to be recovered and the roof cavity is not being exposed, so in this case a recover is I'm going to place a new membrane over the top of the existing. Question is the full R30 insulation required? Roof recover is considered it's considered one of the excluded items from code compliance. So the existing, this is kind of extending the life of the existing membrane. Now, if you are removing the surface, if you remove the existing membrane, there may be an Illinois amendment on this one. We're waiting to see the final code language adopted by CDB and JCAR. So I'm hesitant at this point before we see the text of the Illinois Energy Conservation Code to answer if you pull the membrane, is full compliance required. However, what we have been encountering is compliance to the extent that it is available should be provided. So you may not be able to meet the full R30 depending on parapet wall heights, equipment curbs, tapered insulation, and the like. So it may be such that you're not able to meet a full R30, but if I have, if I presently have an R10 and I'm able to bring it up to an R20, then I'm to make sure that I do that to bring it up to as best code compliance as I can given the existing restrictions. All right. A question here on additions to a residential building. If you are making an addition onto a residential building, then either the addition must meet the code by itself, or the whole building performance will be required to demonstrate code compliance. An addition you cannot have an addition not meet the code unless you show that the whole building is code compliant through a performance-based method. Performance-based method is not a com check or a res check. Those are prescriptive based compliance methods. There are several different code compliance or performance compliance tools, but res check and com check are not those. Those are using U factor and UA trade-offs. So that is a part of the prescriptive based using those tools. Heated garages. Illinois Energy Code does call out something specific for heated garages. As far as code compliance, I'll have to look that up here in a bit. What it does require, if I recall, is the insulation values do need to be in compliance with the envelope. However, a pressure test is not required as part of the heated garage. As far as the amendments, and we're hoping to see those fairly soon. We will make sure to post a link to those on the Energy Code website. We anticipate them being made available shortly after JCAR considers them. We believe that those are going to be considered at their June meeting. However, we can't say for certain at this time. As far as the IECC for Chicago, we have heard from sources that Chicago will adopt the 2018 IECC as of June 1st. So they're going to perhaps step a little ahead, but we have not seen that officially on their website yet. So that will be notified as soon as that is made official on the City of Chicago's website. But we have heard some rumblings to that effect, that Chicago will go June 1st and that the rest of the state will go July 1st. Window replacement. That is window replacement, maybe an alteration, but that does not require air leakage testing per 402.412. As it's an alteration, air leakage testing is only required on new construction at this time, and we will email out certificates for those who were in attendance at today's presentation. So that will provide your certificate for CEUs. We understand there may be some groups out there. If you want to reach out to us, if you're attending this as a group, we can see what we may be able to provide for that. I have a question here regarding insulation for C503 exception 3. Seeing if the code I'm not sure if the code has a specific definition. It may be a definition as far as the definition of insulation. That may be found in one of the other codes. I don't believe that may be in the general building, either the IBC, IRC, or other commonly found building codes. It does not require any particular specific type of insulation, so it could be any number of different insulations: fiberglass, rock wool, denim, polyiso, any number of different insulations. So insulation, you'll probably have to look at one of the more general codes, as insulation is not defined specifically in the IECC. So with that, looks like we are at the top of the hour here. So we will conclude today's webinar today. I want to thank everyone for joining in. So again, if you do have any questions, feel free to email us, energycode@cdac.org. And have a great afternoon. Thank you.